With the last couple of chapters, the hype train is back to Blue Lock, and it's just pure fire. And of course, the writer knew how to hook us in. He knew how to set a blaze to his show, because nothing screams hype more than introducing yet another New Gen 11, another striker New Gen 11. As you see, this was on Kaiser's introduction level of hype. And man, we all know how great Kaiser was, not only for Blue Lock's best arc, but also as a benchmark for the main roster. However, I truly believe Bunny actually packs more hype than Kaiser ever did, and that actually boils down to three simple reasons. First, now we actually know the true level of these beasts, unlike before where we only had a vague image of what a New Gen 11 could do. This time, thanks to Kaiser and Lorenzo, we know exactly how broken they are. Second, unlike Lorenzo, this is yet another striker New Gen 11. Not only that, but unlike Kaiser, he is a genius. And after the PXG game, we know that geniuses are more volatile, are more explosive than the talented learners. And finally, and the biggest reason honestly, is that we got this insanely intriguing scene of Sae actually looking hella mad at Bunny. And this honestly alone gave birth to so many theories that I really can't help but get excited for Bunny. And so, let's talk about them. Let's talk about how Bunny will change Blue Lock forever. Because believe it or not, there is a new him in town. There is yet another badass player for the Blue Lockers to beat in the U20 World Cups. However, I hear you ask, why all the hype? How could we tell that Bunny will deliver the same Kaiser did? Or better yet, how could we tell that he might be even better? Well, in order to understand this, we gotta look on how Blue Lock actually builds hype. How could the writer deliver such a story that is filled with hype, filled with character building, and just filled with pure fire? And the answer for that is actually pretty simple. You see, the writer of Blue Lock employs a tactic which is all about showing rather than telling. Think about it this way, instead of telling us that Sae is a broken player, the writer actually introduces his little brother Ren, who is in fact inferior to Sae at that point. However, he was such a huge deal to the Blue Lockers that it honestly made us think of just how broken and crazy Sae really is. And once we actually got to witness a little bit of his craziness, we were introduced to Kaiser, and instead of the writer telling us that Kaiser is that crazy broken player, he actually simply showed us a glimpse of what a New Gen 11 is capable of. This way, there was really no need for an introduction statement or performance recap for Kaiser, because we already knew that this guy will rock the Blue Lockers, and boy oh boy, he definitely did that. And of course, the same could be said about Lorenzo. In fact, we didn't even know he was a New Gen 11 until the last moment, where he completely decimated Kaiser. And of course, with the exception to few outliers, this is the main way the writer delivers hype to new characters. However, I truly believe the writer pulled all the stops for Bunny, as no one really carried this much of hype in the entirety of the U20 category. And honestly, it wouldn't be too crazy to compare his hype to the master strikers in the NEL. You see, for Bunny, a lot of clues were shown as to why he will be crazy. First, after the PXG game, we now know what it means to be a genius compared to a talented learner. Not only that, but unlike Lorenzo and Sae, he is yet another New Gen 11 striker. And of course, him having that deep connection with Sae and having him looking that mad at him should tell you everything you need to know about how crazy Bunny will be. And through these little building blocks, the writer was able to build an insane image for Bunny. And now everyone knows that in addition to Loki, Bunny has the potential to be the most influential player in the U20 World Cups. And the fact that I am putting him in the same conversation as Loki should tell you everything about his level. However, there is another angle to look at. You see, the other New Gen 11 striker, Kaiser, is actually a talented learner. And this is far more interesting than what people might believe at first glance. As you see, despite Kaiser having the possibility of being more consistent than Bunny, the latter will actually be an unexplained force that Isigi can't just understand by observing like he did with Kaiser. And this will put Isigi in a test at a true wall of evolution. Because unlike before, where it only was 3 minutes against Loki and Noah, this time it will be a real fight to the death. However, in speaking about the world of evolution, it actually leads us straight into talking about his relationship with Sae. As I said before, the most plausible theory to Sae's downfall in Real, and the reason he dropped being a striker for being a midfielder, is actually him reaching the wall of talent or the wall of evolution. And while in the PXG game where both Kaiser and Isigi had each other in addition to Hiyori, Sae in reality found himself alone. And so the theory tells us that he was forced into taking the most rational option, which is to stay true to his talent that is more inclined to being a midfielder than a striker. What I think I failed at predicting, however, is actually the nature of the striker or strikers that forced him to be in a midfielder. I mean, we knew of course that they would be geniuses, but for Bunny to be a high flyer was an odd choice, to be honest. I mean, I'm all down for it. Aryu is probably one of my favorite dark horses of Blue Lock, but to be honest, it feels odd from the writer. However, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, and in reality it is making me more excited for Bunny, because he will be excelling with an underused weapon in Blue Lock, and so I am all here for it. But this also means that Bunny will probably score the most hype, the most unhuman goals in the entirety of the U20 World Cups. Think what Shido could do, but on steroids, which alone is enough to turn me into Bachira and get my excitement juices excited. And this in fact will lead us straight into the theories that I've prepared for you guys today. The first of which has to do with just how hard Bunny will be to defend against. Just imagine him versus Japan in the semi or even the finals of the U20 World Cups, and just how much the defense line will struggle just to keep this beast inbound, because usual man marking will simply not do, and I think they might need both Aryu and Aiko to team up against him in order just to hold his high flying capabilities. And mind you, this is so bad for Japan, because it leaves the team wide open for the rest of the team, which means against Spain, Japan might be forced into employing a defensive formation, just so they can stop Bunny and the rest of the Spanish offensive line. And I don't know about you guys, this is just insane for me, and I really can't wait to see this game specifically. But before we carry on talking about Mr. Hype Iglesias, let's shift gears and talk about Sae and his relationship with Bunny for a second. As even though the idea of Bunny being the one who crushed Sae is honestly just insane, it is not the only fiery theory we have regarding this duo. As a more insane one is actually Bunny being originally Sae's rival in Real before going to FC Barça, and that alone is actually a huge deal in real life football, and if you know you know. But also it might mean that Sae's ego did not actually get crushed. He simply realized that he is better off, or Sae is having more fun feeding Bunny insane passes so the latter can score outwardly goals with his insane agility and aerial mobility, which might mean that they had a similar relationship to Hiyori and Isigi, and Sae then felt betrayed when Bunny joined FC Barça, and that could be the reason why he was so mad at him. In addition to that, this also could explain why Sae chose Shido back in the day. It might be so he can experience the playing style he had with his former friend or rival. But also, it honestly could be even simpler. If Bunny crushed Sae's dream of becoming a striker, the latter might have used Shido in order to learn how to crush a high flyer such as Bunny. And I know Shido at that point might not have been even close to Bunny. However, it was an experiment for Sae in order to at least learn something. And this, by the way, proves that Sae is definitely a talented learner, because in order to beat a genius, Sae had to study and Sae had to lay out a tangible path towards victory, the same way Kaiser trained and the same way Isigi dealt with geniuses in the Neo-Egoist League. But if Sae is actually a talented learner, there is another theory that sprouts into mind. Remember what Ego said about talented learners actually discovering the genius of geniuses? Much like the case with Ryo and Nagi, Sae might have been the player who actually discovered Bunny's talent, and the latter then ended up being his rival or enemy rather than just his friend. And they had a miscommunication that never healed, and they both went their separate ways. And to be honest, at this point, these theories are really getting wild, and I am all here for it. However, and if you could believe it, it doesn't end here, as a more serious and a more dark theory would ironically include Ray Dark, pun very much intended. As we have seen with the case of Kaiser, Ray Dark has a very sharp eye for talent. Even though Michael is a talented learner, he was discovered much like a genius by Ray Dark. And this is honestly quite interesting because, as Isigi points out, it is actually harder to pinpoint a talented learner's talent, unlike for example geniuses whom explosions are very loud and very volatile. which again means it is actually quite astonishing and interesting that Ray discovered Kaiser, who much like he anticipated became one of the best strikers in the U20 category. And this is exactly where things get very dark. You see, what if Ray was the one behind Sae's scouting by Real in order to run an experiment of putting a genius against a talented learner, either as teammates meaning friends or rivals, or as total enemies on Real and FC Barca. And there, the result was that the genius completely decimated the talented learner, and the latter had to take the rational path of becoming a midfielder. This honestly would set Blue Lock ablaze, because not only does it mean Ego might be a threat to this man's plans, but also the likes of Snuffy, who pulled a very broken person and made him the new gen center back. Or, in reality, this actually leads us to another counterpart theory regarding Ray Dark. And it actually doesn't include Sae, but it is very much about Bunny's Mojito look. You see, Ray Dark has an experiment in mind. There is broken people are actually more inclined to succeed and more inclined to dominate. And thus he had a plan to choose the most broken youngsters in Europe and make them play football. That way he can cultivate a generation of very broken, very successful players that, much like Lorenzo, Kaiser and potentially Bunny, will dominate the competition and thus generate more money for FIFA, which is of course his ultimate goal. And despite this seemingly being far-fetched, it is actually not new to Blue Lock. As Ego said at the beginning of the show, the best strikers always come from very hard upbringings, and Ray actually might be pushing this concept to the extreme to gain the most out of it. In fact, he has an actual plan of bringing broken people and make them football players. That way, as I said, they might dominate, but also it might change their lives at the same time. And this theory obviously is not as dark as the previous one, in fact it might be even good. I still think because he values nothing above money, he might even run experiments on these broken people who have nowhere else to go. And to be honest, when it comes to Bunny and judging how he looks and that scar on his face, this all but kinda confirms this theory. It might be the reason why only Sae, who came from Japan, which is relatively safe compared to the rest of the world, is the only new Gen 11 who probably had a normal life. But the theory actually goes a little bit further. You see, if this is true, and trauma correlates to performance, I would think due to the scars and how his face looks, Mojito Iglesias might have had the hardest childhood, maybe even being affiliated to some gangs in Spain. And this led him to almost losing his life before getting saved by Ray Dark. That way he might actually be the best new Gen 11 in the entirety of the world, just due to how much he endured. And honestly, much like Isigi deducted that his smiles are empty shells covering sadness, this all but confirms what I am saying. And honestly, I'm all here for it. I'm all here for Bunny being the best new Gen 11. I'm all here for Bunny being such an unstoppable force that Japan might need to pull their S game in order to stop Spain. However, and before we carry on with Bunny, we are not done with Ray Dark, because I still believe there is one theory that I should mention. You see, when we got introduced to Ray Dark, the FIFA panel looked like the round table from Arthur's story, which could also mean that we might get Lancelot among them, who might have been the one behind Bunny and Sae scouting, and is aiming to use this dynamic to betray Ray, kinda how Boratsuta is working behind Ego to bring his downfall by scouting 3 players, Sae, Nagi and a third anonymous player, which kinda makes a crazy theory as someone from FIFA betraying Ray seem almost plausible and in fact might be even a great theory. And by the way, all of these Ray Dark theories were actually submitted by one genius friend of the channel over on my Discord server. So a big shout out to you, Rex, and everyone who submitted theories on Bunny, whom, speaking of which, I kept the best theory on Iglesias last. And this one honestly is just crazy, so buckle up. You see, everyone was excited for Bunny, but at the same time everyone found his name a bit on the nose, or even lazy writing you could say. I mean, don't get me wrong, Iglesias is actually perfect. He's Spanish and he fits so well. However, Bunny, I don't know, just because he jumps high, that's a bit lazy, right? Well, no. You see, the writer has established he is a genius, and so this could not have been a mistake. As Raouf noted on a comment on my post, in Asian mythology, rabbits are always associated with traits of lion or maybe even betrayal if we extend the definition. And this simple revelation actually connects the dots to almost every theories we've seen in this video so far. Like for example his relationship with Sae being akin to that of Rio and Nagi, and then Bunny ended up betraying Sae. Or Ray Dark choosing him specifically so he can betray and break Sae, and then Ray sees where Sae takes his ego from there. Or hell, even him being a dark character who moves forward only by crushing or betraying others for personal gain, which honestly could be the most plausible theory on the video. However, I will not rule any of them, because right now Blue Lock is on fire, and some of these ideas the writer is throwing are just crazy, and so I wouldn't really rule any theory despite how far-fetched they might seem, because honestly with Bunny right now, only the sky is the limit. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. And it goes without saying, I would love to read your theories down in the comments, or join me over on Discord so we can have a discussion about Bunny or anything related to Blue Lock for that matter. However, with that, until next time, thank you for watching.